Okay, there we go. Okay, it is 6:30 on September 7th. This is the Parking Committee meeting. I'm Lisa Dorsey, Chair. I've got Nick Allen and Mr. Bernie Flynn as council member. I also have Mr. Sean Metrick as the department head and Assistant Borough Manager. I'm calling the meeting to order. Second item on the agenda, comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda. Hearing none. Moving on to number 3, garage management monthly report. Mr. Forrest is not here tonight. Were you going to walk through this?
I have this slide in the director's report, so I'll touch on those topics. If you want me to just start right into the director's report, I can do
Go
that.
for it.
Thank you. We are in the middle of residential parking permit season. When I last checked, the office had issued 1,000 residential parking permits in the first 3.5 weeks of August. So big hats off to everybody on my staff, in the parking department. Hector, people, the parking services clerk have been really working hard to get through the backlog of voicemails, get to the emails, get permits issued, and work through problems and issues that come up with permit applications. It's not an easy task, and I was thinking about it as how important it is because it's our first line of enforcement. The first line of enforcement is to make sure you're issuing the permits to the right people in the first place. So that's why we have kind of a process that involves a lot of hoop jumping. And every process can be improved. That's my philosophy. We can get better at it. It's a little confusing, honestly, to walk in the front door virtually or physically and apply for a permit, and I see that with some fresh eyes. So I'm going to be thinking about ways to that because the best sources of that information for that kind of improvement are coming from the staff. So going forward, I just wanted to recognize all the hard work you guys are doing. So thank you. Getting to our monthly report, we have a couple of things that are going to look familiar to you because I've been training you slowly to recognize these things in our report because they happen every month. We're going to talk about occupancy, which is the next slide. And you all have printouts of this, and we are trending slightly upwards, but we are still at a point where Bicentennial Garage is roughly half full on a daily average number. Chestnut is about 1/3 full. But we are trending positively over the course of the year. Revenue is increasing quicker than occupancy is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because the committee had 2 questions last month that I want, and one of them has to do with garages. This chart is not legible unless you have it in front of you, printed out. But it's a good piece of information for people who want to look at the nitty-gritty. These are our 3 major revenue categories. It's good news. Our positive budget variance on these 3 big categories is plus $160,000. So our parking ticket revenue is down off of its March and April highs. We're still beating monthly budget estimate. We clocked in at a little over $88,000 in August. Our straight line budget prediction was 83,000. I always look at ticket violations and I think to myself, someday everybody in the borough is going to wake up and pay their parking and be properly registered and will not be able to write any tickets. But that day hasn't happened yet, but it may come. It may come. The good news in this sea of numbers is that your parking meter revenue is starting to pick up. That is really good news because that was the lagging income source that we wanted to keep our eye on, and it also has implications for next year's budget. Go to the next slide. Generally speaking, we're beating budget. We've been beating budget ever since March, each month. We got a little close to the budget line there in June, but we rebounded in July. And we had a really good August. So I'm happy that budget on these three items, revenue seems to be above the red line, but we have an important 3-4 months ahead of us. Next slide. In the parking meter revenue, this is that last category, and I wanted to just, you all have black and white printed out in front of you, so I want you to focus on the yellow-orange line. That's this year's revenue for parking meters only, and you can see it really spiked up in July. That's because we were sitting on $48,000 of quarters. And it got deposited about 6 weeks late. So smooth that July and June points out a little bit, bring the June one up a little bit in your mind and the July one down about half of the way. August still looks pretty good. In fact, August looks like a lot like 2018, darn close to 2018. So what I want to see in September, October, November is parking meter revenue be over $150,000 a month. We're almost there as of August. If that happens, then we can have better confidence going into next year that we're going to earn more money at our meters, be able to transfer more money to the general fund, and be able to pass that on to the citizens in the borough. So this is what I'm going to be looking at, and hopefully we'll have some good news in September. Next page is the detail. Committee members have the printout in front of them of the garage management report. I think it's good to note a couple of things in this report, that we continue to beat budget, so to speak, for our transient revenue. That means people coming into the garages who don't have monthly permits. We're getting more those kinds of customers than we thought we would. Park thought we would, and that's really driving our revenue numbers in the garages. But our monthly permit parkers, which typically are the biggest group, been a little bit of erosion there, but not a lot. I'm going to get to that just a second here. So the next slide summarizes what I was just talking about with your garages and your meter revenue. It's a general summary of what I've been talking about. It's good news. It's certainly better than 2020, and I think that the next 3-4 months, parking meter revenue is going to be the key thinking about budget in 2022. But we need to monitor COVID rates and guidance coming out about COVID. You know, we're at, I saw today, 136,000 average new cases per week right now. It's not a good number. You want it down. You want that a lot lower. But, fortunately, the rate at which that's been increasing is slowing down this couple weeks.
Hey, Mr. Metric, the top line item, garage occupancy is very slow bicentennial. Is that permit or is that transient? Or is that everything?
See, Bernie's a few steps ahead of me. He's like the Russian spy.
I apologize. I take back my question.
Because here's the next the next slide, please, are the I have the clicker. I should be clicking. My bad, Will.
See, you trained us so well to
I
these
know, right?
reports that
I can't even click for myself anymore. There were 2 questions from the committee about garages. What's the availability and procedure for applying for your monthly permits, and what's the logic behind those sales? So on to the next slide. Charge $1.50 an hour to park in either of our handsome garages. There's about 1,000 spaces total in each. Once you are there for 6 hours, the maximum rate's $9. You can stay there the rest of the day. $9 is the most we'll ever charge you to park daily rate in the garage. We also sell monthly permits, and we sell a limited supply of those monthly permits, and we sell them at a 50% discount on the face price if you're buying a day permit. And that's the most popular permit. That permit gets you into the garage at 6 in the morning, but you got to leave by 9 p.m. Costs you $90 a month. So if you're spending $9 a day, you're working here 5 days a week, and you're working 4 weeks a month, you're spending about $180. So that's my 50% discount. So it doesn't make economic sense to sell your entire garage out to monthly parkers, but it does make sense to sell spaces to monthly parkers because they're contracted. They pay you. They pay you whether they park there or not, and that's the key thing. So next slide. What you're trying to do, and this conversation was between me and someone, Emerson at, not someone, Emerson at Impark, and the way you make it work is you oversell monthly permits. So in the Bicentennial Garage, we currently have a waiting list and we're at maximum capacity with our monthly permits, and we've sold 360 total permits. Most of those are the day permits, and you can see the evening permits are not popular. There's just nobody out there buying, I need to park my car here overnight. So what we're really, selling to are the people who want the 24/7, but mostly the persons who are coming in here to work. If you recall, there's about 380 spaces, give or take, in the Bicentennial Garage. So we're at maximum capacity there as the way we have set our goals for occupancy. And in Chestnut Street Garage, we've sold 686 of these permits. And once you buy a permit and you pay the monthly fee and keep paying it, you keep your permit. We don't kick you off the permit rolls. So ideally what you're trying to do, given our normal occupancy, and here's the subtlety and what I'm trying to get at, is you're trying to oversell your monthly permits so you've got 1 to 1.25 vehicles per spaces. The pandemic right now is really skewing the data. All of these, what's really going on right now is in the Chestnut Street Garage especially, getting less than half of these monthly permit parkers actually coming in and parking the vehicles there. They're still paying. They're still paying the fee, but they're not parking the cars there because they haven't come back to work in Westchester. So I think the employers who are paying these fees are hedging, this tells me that parking spaces are really valuable in Westchester during the day. Why would you be paying for something you're not going to use unless you think you're reserving? They're basically paying for the right to park there in the future, reserve their spots. So we're in a really screwy situation where do occupancy counts in Chestnut Street Garage, and it's at its most full Thursday nights, probably 65% full Thursday nights, Friday nights. And we are at our capacity of selling permits. The problem is if we were to sell more permits and then people come back to work, we don't have the spaces left that you need for transient parkers. Or even if you went above 686, if you sold, let's say you sold 800 permits in the Chestnut Street Garage, there could be a time and place where not even your monthly permitters can get a space in the garage, and that would be really situation. So it's a balance that I'm trying to communicate as best I can, that we try and oversell the permits at, between 1 and 1.25 vehicles per space. But right now we're in a crazy situation where people are paying these permits but not actually using them, just hedging their futures to make sure they have a place to park when their employees do come back. So next slide. So that was I hope helps answer some of the questions about that. Right now we have a waiting list, a very short waiting list for monthly permits at Bicentennial. There's currently no waiting list at Chestnut Street Garage, so you can still buy a permit there. But I expect those to go soon. The next thing I want to talk about a little is really, I just want to lay out kind of a roadmap in the next maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes and get your feedback. Or of my observations of the residential parking permit program and what we can do going forward. Could you go back one? Thanks. So this is real. This is just a getting my thoughts down on paper at this point. It'll be backed up by more, data and logic as we keep going forward. But consider this as my fresh perspective on things as somebody who has been in Westchester, working here now for just 8 months. Your residential parking permit system is really complex. It's not a really big borough, but inside the borough, you have 23 different zones. That means we have to buy 23 different types of parking signs. And when we run out of one of them, we got to buy a special parking sign that has the right AM to PM on it and the right letters in the right spots. There's overlapping regulations that you're familiar with. Issue on Minor Street in your ward where we have metered spaces overlapped with residential parking permit program. So this leads to some issues around legibility. We publish a print paper map that cringe a little bit at because the cartography is not very good. It's not a real map. I think it's hard for persons coming to the borough to understand what they need. I hear that a lot in customer service issues. I'm seeing more of it in my inbox now when people are trying to figure out, I don't even know where I can park or what I need. I think we can work on our legibility. It creates some issues with enforcement. Obviously, if you have an officer going from block to block and the zones and times of day change, he or she has to kind of think on their feet and really work intuitively with their handheld enforcement unit and the maintenance issues I've touched on. But I also know that there's really high demand for parking in the borough, and citizens care a lot about parking. It's one of the sacred cows of politics. You want to park your car as close as you can to your house. And having lived in a tight borough myself many years ago when I had young kids, we kind of policed it ourselves. We didn't have parking permits, but you weren't supposed to leave your car out in front of my house for the whole work week because, coming home with an infant and we needed to be near our front door, and worked it out. But people feel really strongly about that, and I get that. So some of our strengths, as I touched on before, we have an experienced and knowledgeable staff. Even our least tenured employees do their job. Really, Mohammed Yatasai, who was recently promoted to a full-time position, is one of our most effective enforcement officers. Liz Herman, who came back to work for us, is an outstanding enforcement officer who really understands the idiosyncrasies of the system and how technology works. And I've already commented on the parking service staff. The software we're using for permit payment and enforcement and meter management and parking kiosk management, it's all pretty good stuff. Get a lot of information out of it, and we've spoken with the IT people at those companies, and we're really excited about potential integration with our graphic information systems to help with what I'm going to get at in my next slide and my solution to all of this. The staff is engaged in mostly productive endeavors, things like customer service and enforcement related activities. There's not a lot of waste, and people should be doing. People are engaged in their work, which I find a good thing. And we have a good parking study plan to follow. So if any big questions come up, you can pull out that study from Desmond that was done a few years ago, and it's still relevant. It has a lot of good recommendations in it. Tried to really use just that as our source of information to make a change to the guest permit program that didn't, that ran into some issues when we brought it up. But I have a suggestion for that. So it basically comes down to what are we going to do to make good decisions about parking management? And I think what we're missing is good data about utilization. How many cars are parking on the street? When are they parking there? So it's really difficult for you all as decision makers about ordinances and policy, and for us as administrators to make those decisions based on anecdotal evidence or emotions or actions people are having to parking, because parking's emotional. So I think it would help all of us to have really good data at our hands and fingertips to help with our decisions. It can help us rethink our basic assumptions about parking supply and demand. Got that great study we can lean on. So on the next slide, this is call this toddler GIS, because I didn't have a whole lot of time to think it through. But yellow line is a road segment. So every road segment in the borough can be attributed to a parking zone. All of those road segments you can attribute data to. So what I'm going to propose we do, and this is something Bill and I have to talk about, and Hector and I have to talk about, is creating a system where we can employ our effective parking enforcement officers to populate data forms. And what they're going to basically be doing is they're going to be spending some of their time, not a lot of their time, but some of their time counting cars. And I tried this out with our license plate recognition technology, thinking you could just drive down the street and automatically count them all. Unfortunately, it misses a lot of license plates. I wouldn't say a lot. It misses maybe, on a crowded street, it'll miss maybe 10 out of 50 license plates because they're parked too close to one another. My little dream of driving a car around and collecting data didn't work out. We're actually going to have to manually do this, but it's going to be pretty easy to do because we have the tools in place, the software in place, we have the know-how in place to make this all happen. So what we're going to do on the next page here is you would basically go down this 400 block of Walnut Street, and count the cars, and then populate a table in a form with that number and count, with the date that you did it and the time of day that you did it for cars that you counted. And we could use GIS and attribute that road segment a parking supply based upon the linear feet of area that you can actually park a car on, subtracting out that 25 feet on either corners, subtracting out anything that's fire hydrant or driveways, so forth. And there you would have your supply and your demand measurement. And the idea is that parking works best, generally speaking, when 80 to 85% of your spaces are occupied. It means you're getting really good utilization and people don't have to spend a lot of time driving around our space. That ideal utilization number drops if your road is too narrow. If your road is too narrow and you're parking cars on both sides and you want two-way traffic, there's too much friction and you need a lower utilization number, or else you're going to be stuck on the street. The break-even number there is about 32, 30 feet. You have 2 lanes of traffic and 2 parking on both sides. A lot of the streets in the borough are parking both sides one-way traffic, which is really efficient. I'm glad you did it that way, because you're getting the most bang for your buck parking-wise, and it's actually much safer to have cars going in one street, provided they obey the speed limit. So I digress a little bit, but there's an ideal number we should be shooting for utilization, and if aren't reaching it, then we know where the problems are happening, what time of day they're happening, do something about it, policy or enforcement. But I think before we do anything else with the parking system, we need this information. I'm trying to get you on board, get you all on my train of thought, buy into it, because it'll help you navigate the often emotionally charged, difficult conversations you have with neighbors and people in this room about parking regulations. So I intend to get this form tested and workflowed out this month, start the field collection, at least one of the officers troubleshoot it, and then distribute it in November and start collecting the data and see if we need make any adjustments to how we're collecting. Really start to churn it out about Thanksgiving, December, January. And it won't be until we've surveyed enough streets enough times, like we'll have to come back to the same block several times to capture different times a day. But once you have that table pretty well populated, select, like, show me parking demand between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And that'll show you what's happening when most persons are coming home. Have enough data points at some point in the near future where you'll have a pretty good representative sample. And I think we should always be doing this. It should just be part of what the PEOs do.
My fingers, because everything's going to be skewed based on the 19,000 people, temporary people that we have come in August and they leave in May. So I counted 10 months that they'd actually be here. Get 2 months of the numbers not really, they are, but that's when we could do the maintenance and stuff on the streets. So that makes a lot of sense. So it's, I'm trying to really understand that you're looking at inventory versus permits, correct? Whether we're selling the right amount of permits or we're selling not enough permits. Basically, the southeast quadrant of the borough is this issue during 10 months. Is that what you're really focusing on?
I think you can get to those questions pretty quickly from the data. There's a lot of different possibilities, and one thing I could anticipate happening is maybe you see a really high utilization number that's not acceptable. It's 95. Every 11 a.m. sample you do within a quarter-mile university has a 90% occupancy, and that's unacceptable because your residents can't park near their homes. Maybe then you look at different layers of the problem. How much off-street parking supply do you have in those areas? What can we do to incent persons to, are those off-street spaces occupied? What can we do to incent those individuals to park off-street, if that's the solution? That was one of the problems we wrestled with in the last community I worked with. It was low supply on the street, but it was because people weren't parking in their driveways. We'd rather keep the driveways open in a tight urban area because that was a safe place for the kids to play, or they had a table out there. There's a lot of possibilities once we know if we have a problem.
Mr. Allen, as far as I'm concerned, would be the best judge of it because he's articulated through that area. I've heard him complain on many a time there's no place to park over that way. Other than like Ward 6, Ward 7, the other wards, it's pretty constant. Have X amount of houses and the people park out front or park on the street. You get very little pushback, the other areas. But Mr. Allen's the judge of what that area entails. He got a lot of tickets too, I think.
That's, might have happened. Do you remember 400 block of East Minor college kids playing ping pong on the front? That was me. So I was even there too. That's a very unique block for parking. Or is it your block? That doesn't have permit parking. So I would park on your block a lot because I had an out-of-state plate, so I couldn't apply for permit parking. So I frequented the 300 block of East Minor quite a bit.
Yeah, what happens in
Or
the
West
300
Minor.
block of West Minor Street is the county doesn't have enough parking spots for people going to court. There's no place for them to park. Because the county parking garage is full based on juries. You know, if they're selecting juries, you can't get in there. So then all the DAs and all the clerks park on West Minor Street from New to Wayne because those people go to work during the day and there's no parking permit on the block. The residents don't want it because they don't want to be handcuffed to those restrictions. You know, we have enough off-street parking that every house has off-street parking, 300 block, so it's not a problem, you know, that way. But, you know, a lot of college kids will leave the car in front of my house, but they forget to move it on Wednesdays. It's a wonderful thing. So, you know, they've gotten better at it. But Mr. Allen mentioned they warehouse in certain areas, so.
Sorry, those games were a little loud. I think we kept it down at night, but I have one question, really. The strategy I think is really great, and I'm looking forward to making more data-backed choices. That's what I tell my students to do in math class, so I appreciate that. And I do think this is going to help a lot because this is, to be completely honest, I was not thrilled about getting assigned this committee just because I know of the emotion behind it all. So I do think this makes a lot of sense. Can we, or I guess if you look back at the parking meter revenue, the one where you did the graph with the 4 different years on it, so we can definitely look at that, and I might bring this up tomorrow at finance, but we can definitely say, looking at that we're still, in 2021, we are making less money than 2019 because of COVID.
Other than budget, because we set the budget realistically, knowing that no one was ever going to come back, you know, and as Mr. Metric mentioned, the state of Florida, which was a total mess with the Delta variant, a total mess. It hit its high on August the 15th. Now it's almost back down within manageable areas. So the Delta variant, the splurge has already happened. So hopefully the businesses will start seeing that and start coming back into borough. So.
But yeah, so I get that in reference to the budget. Perfect.
Nick's microphone works. I thought it was good to have a fresh set of eyes. I know those of us who live in, to Nick's point and Bernie's point, live in the borough. This is a very emotional subject and can get very heated very fast, as we saw with the permit and guest passes a couple of months ago. So I think it's good to have, you know, an objective viewpoint and a fresh set of eyes to look at the data. And numbers don't lie, something I say at work all the time. So thank you. And the last item on the agenda, number 5, approve the August 2021 parking meeting minutes.
Very good.
Any other business? Adjourned. 7:04.